How's it going out there, everybody? I'm Marq Burnett, Alabama beat writer for SECCountry.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Marq_Burnett. That's at MARQ_BURNETT. Obviously, read all of my work at SECCountry.com. I wanted to check in with you guys tonight, just to sort of get you ready for Ole Miss week, catch you up on everything that happened today. Big Monday in terms of news. Reporters got to speak to Nick Saban on Monday to open the Ole Miss week, and we also got to speak to a bunch of players just to sort of set the stage, for the big week coming up. Alabama's a 8.5-point favorite over the Rebels. That game's going to be in Oxford, Mississippi on Saturday. Kickoff time at 3:30 Eastern time on CBS, so you can watch the game there. I'll be there covering the game, so if anybody's going to the game, obviously look for me, give me a shout out or something like that. So just kind of get you started for the week. We talked to Nick Saban today. He seemed very calm, very chill. Nothing out of the ordinary. He wasn't upset. Very subdued, I guess, in a sense. It was kind of almost hard to hear him. He seemed not necessarily relaxed, but he was just so chill compared to what he was last week at this time. I think the bigger the game, the more he tries to be sort of relaxed and chill, just so that he doesn't give off a over-the-top vibe to his players. I think he wants the players to understand that, while this is obviously a big game, you have to treat every game the same. You don't want to get too high or too low for any one game. I feel like that was kind of his message today, just kind of sort of, stand within yourself and not letting, any team or anything like that get you too emotional. Obviously, this is a big one for Alabama. They've lost to Ole Miss the last two times they played. Last year in Tuscaloosa, Ole Miss beat them 43-37. A bit of a fluky game. Alabama had 5 turnovers, but Ole Miss was able to capitalize on those turnovers. So you got to give the Rebels credit for what they were able to do in Tuscaloosa and Bryant-Denny Stadium. And then 2 years ago, Ole Miss was able to beat them 23-17. A strange game for Alabama where they come out, have the lead at halftime, go up 14. They have 14 points in the first half, but they only scored 3 points in the second half of that game as Ole Miss's defense really shut down Alabama's offense. Alabama couldn't get anything going, and obviously that game came down to sort of a final possession with Alabama throwing the interception in that game. So, we talked to Nick Saban. He said that, they won't necessarily use this motivation, use our revenge as motivation, but, it's easy to see that these players and the coaching staff want to get this win. They're the ultimate competitors. Nobody wants to have a team beat you, multiple times in a row, especially these seniors. They've seen what it's like to lose to Ole Miss and different things like that. And the last thing they want to do is have another loss to Ole Miss as their careers sort of wrap up here at Alabama. We talked to a guy like Jonathan Allen, Eddie Jackson today. Jackson said that it sort of adds a little fuel to the fire knowing that this team has beat Alabama in the last couple of years. Look at last year. The only game Alabama lost was to Ole Miss. They obviously still wound up made the playoff, but still that's still one knock on Alabama is that they have to be able to get over the hump of Ole Miss. So I think you'll see a fired up Alabama team when they travel to Oxford on Saturday. I think the players will be excited. They'll be amped up for this one, and I think Alabama is in good shape to sort of get this win. Just because if you look at both sides of the ball for both teams, I think it's going to be tough for Ole Miss to move the ball in Alabama consistently. Ole Miss doesn't have a real running threat. They can really pass the ball vertically, but I think the strength of Alabama's defense this year is that back seven and that secondary. So I expect Alabama's secondary to really lock things down on the back end. If you guys are commenting right now, I'm not able to see the comments, so I'm just going to continue with the breakdown. So sorry about that if we're having some technical difficulties there. But, the first thing I want to touch on was the quarterbacks. Nick Saban came out today. He didn't necessarily name Jalen Hurts the starting quarterback, but he acknowledged that Jalen Hurts obviously played the most in Saturday's games. And I thought that was the closest you'll probably get to Nick Saban naming a starting quarterback. If you look at back when Blake Sims won the job in 2014 and Jake Coker last year, even A.J. McCarron in 2011, Saban never came out and publicly said that those guys were the starting quarterback. He kind of just lets it play out organically and lets it sort of just become obvious. With Jalen Hurts playing 9 series and Blake Burnett playing, about 3, it's kind of obvious. Jalen Hurts played 3 times the amount of series that Burnett did, so I think Jalen Hurts is the starting quarterback. So that's going to be something to watch the true freshman in his first hostile environment, first true road test. How does he respond when all the fans are sort of, against him? I think Hurts will be fine, though. I think the biggest thing about him that I've been impressed with is just his poise and his moxie and his ability to just stay calm no matter the circumstances. If you look back at the SC game against Southern Cal when he fumbled on that first play of his college career, he just kind of came out and he just took it in stride and he came back out and he got back after it. He never let anything bother him or anything like that. And even on Saturday in the home opener versus Western Kentucky, when the offense struggled early on, Hurts just kind of plowed through, never let anything get him down, and I think that's important for a young quarterback. We talked to some of the leaders today, and those were some guys like Eddie Jackson, Jonathan Allen, O.J. Howard, all said that they've been really impressed with Jalen Hurts' poise, with his leadership, which is impressive for a freshman, for seniors to say that about you. I mean, they've said that this guy's come in from day one and has been a real leader. They said he's speaking up to the offensive linemen, he's talking to the team, telling them where they need to be and sort of giving them encouragement when things don't go right. And if you're an Alabama fan, I'm sure that's great to hear. That's great to see. I can see the comments now. So Willie Cole says, how much will they use O.J. Howard in this game? That's a good question. I think they should use him a good bit because if you look at it, obviously Ole Miss is going to play to take away Calvin Ridley and Ardarius Stewart, who's had 2 big games this year. So that could, if you try to double one of those receivers or try to double both or shade coverage over to both of those guys, O.J. Howard should be open over the middle. So I think he should have a big role in this game. Jenny Rogers said, hopefully they sack Chad Kelly all day long. I think that's going to be one of the keys for Alabama is, when you rush Kelly, is not to get pushed past him, because he is a guy who can scramble. He can make things happen with his legs. So he's a guy who can, if it's third down, the last thing you want to do is have everybody covered and then let Kelly sneak out of the backfield for a 9-yard gain on 3rd and 8, because he's a guy who can do that. I think that was what hurt Alabama some in last year's game. With him just sort of picking up key third down. So I think that'll be one thing that the coaching staff really pays attention to, whether it's keeping a spy on him. A guy to watch out for in that spy role is a guy like Rashaan Evans. He was using that role against Clemson last year in a national championship game. He's got great speed, and he's a really good tackler in space. So he's a guy who could help keep Kelly contained. But speaking of sacking Kelly, Ole Miss's offensive line showed against Florida State that they'll give up some pressure and give up some sacks. Florida State has 6 sacks in that game, which is a big number. So I think Alabama could at least get 4 or 5 sacks, if not more, on Saturday. Debbie McNeil said this would be our big test. Yeah, I definitely think this is going to sort of let Alabama know where they are in terms of is that defense as good as people think it is. Is the offense ready for the big stage? I think the defense is good. I told somebody today, I find it hard to see, a team on Alabama's regular season schedule scoring 3 touchdowns on this defense. And that's obviously as long as the offense or the special teams don't, fumble the ball or put the defense in a bad situation with a short field or something like that. I think in terms of driving the ball down the field on this defense, it's just going to be really hard to do because they have so much speed and they can attack you in so many ways. If you look at the secondary this year so far, they're playing a lot tighter coverage. I mean, they're just blanking the receivers, and there's really nowhere for the quarterbacks to go. I know it's just 2 games. You don't want to overreact, but, I mean, these guys are playing, I think this defense wants to prove that they can be just as good as last year's defense. I think they heard all off season about the guys that they lost, and I think they want to show, the country and everybody that they can be just as good, if not better than last year's group. Another thing I noticed today when we watched practice was the offensive line. We got to see Ross Pierschbacher back at right guard. He and Alphonse Taylor had been rotating there at the right guard spot, so it looks like Ross was back with the first team offense in practice today, and him and Alphonse Taylor was with the second team. The rest of the offensive line had Cam Robinson at left tackle, obviously Lester Cotton at left guard, Bradley Bozeman at center, and then you had Ross at right guard, and then Jonah Williams, the freshman, at right tackle. Speaking of Jonah Williams, he's been impressive. He's been named a coaching staff player of the week the first 2 weeks, which is a high praise for a true freshman. He received the highest grade for any offensive lineman. I think he's been able to hold his own there. He's a guy who's going to have a bright future at Alabama, in my opinion. I think he's a guy who could slide to left tackle next year if Cam Robinson decides to make the jump to the NFL. Rainey Langley says, do you see the offensive line making adjustments? Look like they were not able to open up many running lanes last Saturday. I touched on this in my breakdown after the game. I think if you look back traditionally to how Alabama plays that second game coming off a sort of a big-time opener, they tend to go the same way. You know, they don't really run the ball that well. They just what they're trying to do is see how the quarterback can throw the ball. I think they want to see the quarterback push the ball down the field, and that's what. If you look, I think they called more vertical passing plays in that game than they probably had called. You know, since Nick Saban's been here. I mean, they were really trying to push the ball down the field and see if Jalen Hurts in the passing game could take advantage of some of those opportunities. And also, Western Kentucky was really stacking the box and forcing Alabama to sort of beat them over the top. And I think that's, you know, what a lot of teams are going to do this year, just sort of make Jalen Hurts sort of beat them with his arm because, you know, traditionally Alabama's been a strong running team, but Nick Saban talked about today about how it doesn't matter how many players they put in the defensive front, you're still going to have to run the ball and get some positive yardage just to keep the defense off guard and keep the defense sort of guessing there, because the last thing you want to do is become sort of one-dimensional and and not run the ball, because you know that'll get you beat against some of the better teams. So I expect the offensive line to improve going forward. And there's another thing, you know, they're rotating players at right guard, so it's kind of tough to get that chemistry down when you're trying to rotate players and sort of you're not really settled on five. But I think once they figure out what they're doing at right guard, whether it's Alphonse Taylor or Ross Pierce Baker, I think they'll be fine going forward. You know, just looking at in terms of how, you know, I touched on this earlier, but I think in terms of how Alabama can attack Ole Miss's defense, I think we're going to see, you know, Alabama's receivers sort of be a big focal point in this game, because if you look at Ole Miss and how the defense is built, they're very quick and aggressive up front. They like to do a lot of stunts and a lot of movement up front. But their secondary, you know, is suspect a little bit in my opinion. You know, I think Florida State really exposed their secondary in that season-opening game. Florida State quarterback threw for over 400 yards, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not saying Jalen Hurts is going to come out and throw for 400 yards, but it wouldn't surprise me if Lane Kiffin dialed some plays early to get Jalen Hurts some big plays and get the receivers into open space just to take advantage of that secondary, because I think Ole Miss has a really good front, but their secondary can give up some plays. And then on the other side of the ball, you know, as I said, I think Ole Miss's offensive line is struggling a bit. I think they'll give up some sacks. So I think guys like Jonathan Allen, Tim Williams, and Ryan Anderson, some of those guys are going to have really big days. Ole Miss, you know, for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to develop a consistent running game, so they relied very heavily on Chad Kelly in the passing game. And they got a lot of talented receivers, but you know, if Chad Kelly doesn't have time to drop back and find them, you know, it's going to be a long day for him. So I expect Alabama to get the win in this game, but you know, it's going to be a dogfight, I think. I think Ole Miss is going to come out fired up, and it's not going to be an easy one for Alabama. But I just think with that defense, it's going to be hard for Ole Miss to score and consistently move the ball. I mean, even if you look at last year's game, Ole Miss won the game, but they weren't able to consistently put together drives. They were just lucky on a lot of those situations where, you know, Alabama really shot themselves in the foot. But at the same time, you do have to give Ole Miss credit for taking advantage of those opportunities. So, you know, I'm really excited for this game. You know, I think, you know, this one could be a really big one. There's a lot of good games on Saturday. So, you know, like I said, I'll be at the game. If you guys see me, shoot me a tweet or something like that. Say hello. You can follow me on Twitter at Marq_Burnett. That's at MARQ_BURNETT. Read all my work at SECCountry.com. And I'll probably check back in Wednesday night after Nick Saban speaks, just to kind of give you guys one last rundown before the game, before we sort of settle into the game on Saturday. So you guys take it easy and have a good night.